So in the ongoing series, Her Stories, 100 Women's Voices, today we have someone who I adore and see and have seen as a second mom to me for a number of years. We'll just leave it there. We have Ellen Scheinbach, who was my high school teacher and high school guidance counselor a number of years ago, and I've continued and remained friends for all these years. And I'm happy to have her today talk about her life. So I want to just share why I made the decision to do this series. There were two reasons why I made the decision. And the first reason was a couple of weeks ago, the op-ed in the Wall Street Journal that was chiding our future First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden.
Oh God, yes.
To use that title and not use the title doctor because she's not a medical doctor. And ultimately her biggest role is going to be First Lady, second to her husband. And I thought, how dare you in 2021 try to tell women their place and tell us that we can't use our earned titles. And so that was part of the reason. And then the second reason is because while my mother's been gone 10 years, I really only knew her as a mother. I never actually understood who she was as a person. So I wish I had known, even now as an adult, who she was when she was 20, 30, 40, the things that she was concerned with, her dreams, her aspirations, because ultimately all of those things shaped her to be the woman she became and to be the mother she became. And in turn, that helped to shape who I became. And so in order to honor my mother, I made the decision to do this series, to give voice to other women and hear their stories over the course of their life. So we're going to start with, again, Ellen Scheinbach, who I love dearly. And the first question is, tell me, where did you grow up and what was that like?
It was a different era. It was in the Bronx. It was on Girard Avenue. For the first 9 years of my life, I guess I better put this, mute this, okay. For the first 9 years of my life, I lived on Girard Avenue and 158th Street. And it was a time when kids could really, I mean, I know you see it in the movies, but it's true. You could really go outside, leave your kids outside to play all afternoon after school on weekends. My parents did not stay downstairs with me. If we wanted to go across the street, our parents, somebody had to come down and cross us. But that was the only thing we weren't allowed to do. We used to play marbles. What?
That was Yankee Stadium?
Yeah, it was near Yankee Stadium, and it was also near the Bronx courthouse on 161st Street. So, I mean, when a parent would take us somewhere, if we had roller skates, we would go up to the courthouse because they had like graduated steps. So we would like to go do that. And then the same thing at Yankee Stadium. They didn't have steps, but they had sort of a maze of railings that you could roller skate in and out of. But otherwise, we roller skated downstairs by ourselves. We played jump rope by ourselves. We played ball by ourselves.
And was this a
never thought that we couldn't do that safely? Never.
Right. Well, and was this a predominantly Jewish neighborhood? What was the composition?
No, it was white. I don't know that it was all Jewish. Mm-hmm. It certainly was white. I think there was some Irish and Polish. I'm not sure. You know, I was little. I really don't know.
Right.
My parents never lived in, you know, they never looked for a Jewish neighborhood because they were certainly a-religious. So they didn't care about that particularly. Okay. But I guess even when we moved when I was in 4th grade to this little street called Clinton Place, and they bought a 2-family house, and it was a beautiful little street. It had pear trees, and in the springtime it was beautiful. And again, kids could play outside. I was right across the street from my elementary school, so I used to get in trouble all the time because my mother would stand in the middle of, we lived in the middle of the block. So my mother would stand on the porch and she would let me cross in the middle. But we used to have these kids who were crossing guards who were in 6th grade, big time. And I would get, I don't know what you called it. They would give out little bad slips. And I was always getting a bad slip because I didn't go to the corner, but I didn't want to walk to the corner. And anyway, I would have been late. So that's how I crossed the street all the time. But again, we played outside. I mean, nobody bothered us. My mother always worked. That was the one thing very, very different from my friends' mothers. My mother was the only person. Some of my friends who I'm still good friends with say that my mother was the only mother they knew who worked. And she worked down on 34th Street and 5th Avenue, right across from the Empire State Building. But that's also an indication of what that time was like. We would have half days at school. I was allowed to walk from school about 5 or 6 blocks to the Jerome Avenue subway and get on the subway by myself at the age of 9 and 10 and take it. And it was because it was an express, it would stop at Grand Central, and then we had to take the local to 34th Street. And she would meet me on the platform of Grand Central, and then we would get on the local. She didn't want me transferring trains because she didn't think I would know how to do that. But I mean, can you imagine letting a 10-year-old now walk 6 blocks and get on the Jerome Avenue subway and go all the way downtown to Grand Central Station and get off and know your mother is going to be there? It was a whole different ball game. It was a whole different ball game.
So, and what did your mom do there?
She was a bookkeeper, an account. She never went to college, so she wasn't a real accountant. She was a bookkeeper, but in the end, she was an office manager. And again, she was a high-powered, not high-paid, but she was a high-powered woman. She was really smart. She was in charge of an office of, for most of the time, for part of the time I knew her, when I knew of her work, she worked for this firm called Malley and Hamway, and they imported silk handkerchiefs and silk stuff from, I guess, China or Taiwan. And she was just the bookkeeper.
Okay.
And then she got this job for a place that manufactured, I mean, now I don't even think you know what a handbag frame is. But when you used to carry them, and with a little handle, this place manufactured the frames. And there were 3 salesmen in the office. And she was the bookkeeper and office manager. And she would approve sales of these guys. And these guys reported to her because her boss was up in Connecticut at the factory, which is where he lived. So she was in charge of that New York office. She was in charge of approving or not approving all of the sales, keeping all of the books. She was something.
So how do you think that influenced you, Ellen? Because like you said, for women of your generation, most women of your generation, their mothers didn't work, but your mother did, and she was very powerful in her position. So how did that influence you?
I think it made me think that there was nothing strange about women working even after they were married. For a very long time, I didn't know women cooked. My father was the cook. My father got home at 4:30 in the afternoon, and when we lived on Girard Avenue, my mother didn't. She didn't get home until like 5:30, 6 o'clock. And so he would start dinner. And I always assumed that was it. That was what happened. He made a great spaghetti sauce. He was a really good cook.
Right. That's so
I didn't know women cooked.
Wow. Okay, that
So
explains a lot now. I got it.
yeah, I mean, she would make Thanksgiving dinners.
Mm-hmm.
She would make seders. If it were a big company thing, company
Mm-hmm.
dinners, she would make that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but day to day, he did the grocery shopping. He did the cooking.
Wow.
I used to go with him to the Bronx Little Italy, and he would get cheese. I hated the smell of those places with cheese. To this day, I can't eat most Italian cheeses because it just smells. But we would go there, and there would be these barrels of snails out on the sidewalk on Morris Park Avenue
Oh
and Arthur Avenue, and they would be crawling down the street because they would escape from the barrels.
no. Oh no.
Oh yeah. And then he was friends with the butcher on 183rd Street. So I would go with him. And sometimes when I got older, a little older, so that's it. I mean, I got to be, and it was again, I don't know. It had to be when I was above 9, because that was when we lived on Clinton Place. I used to be able to walk the 3 blocks to the butcher, and he would call the butcher and he would tell him what he wanted, and I would go and I would pick it up and come back with it, and I could do all of I would never in 1,000 years have let my children, let alone my grandchildren,
Right.
go independently.
Right.
I mean, I wouldn't let Sam, my grandson, who's now 15, we didn't even let him go up in the elevator in a doorman building by himself until he was about 10.
Wow.
You know, I mean, because you never know who's going to get in the elevator.
Right.
And he, you know, I was going downtown to Grand Central.
Right. Well,
I'm,
and it's funny that you say that because I am a different generation from you, but like you, I could ride the subways and I could walk like to the library and so forth, 4 or 5 blocks. I could take the train downtown when I was 10, 11 years old, because we were living at a different time. And I think part of it was, if your parents were working, they expected you to kind of pull
yeah.
your load, to help out or to do things. And so much has changed. Now, you were an only child and you were the first in your family to go to college. Did you always know that there was an expectation of you to go to college, or how
Oh,
did
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. No, there was no, my mother, not my father. He never really talked to me about it that much. But oh, yeah, my mother, it was, you're going to go to college. That was a given.
Okay.
It really was. That was a given.
And when you got there, how did you decide to become did you decide you were going to be a teacher right away,
So
or
my mother told me I was going to be a teacher. Um, the only difference, the only way I defied her was she wanted me to be a math teacher.
oh,
And although I was really good in math, I
mhm.
went to Bronx Science, so I was good in math, but it was boring. I mean, it was a puzzle, but then you solved it. It's like if you buy a puzzle now and you put it all together,
You're done.
want to do the same puzzle every day.
Right.
And so I used to say to her, look, Mom, I could teach math until I'm blue in the face, but 2 plus 2 is always going to equal 4. So why would I want to do this year after year after year after year? And I love to read. So I majored in English and I became an English teacher, but becoming a teacher was really not much of an option. First
And
of all, women didn't do other things then.
right, there were just limited professions that women went into.
Yeah, and one of the things I remember most and about my mother was that when she would read the Sunday Times, the classified ads for jobs were separated by sections, jobs for women and jobs for men. And she would look at her position, a bookkeeper, office manager, and she would look in the men's section, and they always made so much more money than she did. And I remember that. And so working in a school system where they couldn't discriminate that way was a big deal. They discriminated in other ways, but it was a big deal to be able to get an equal salary for equal
Work.
pay for equal work.
Right.
And that was true. You couldn't get promoted to the same degree in the beginning when I started working, but you certainly got equal pay.
Was it, because I spoke to another teacher who's retired now, and she said that, of course, her generation, the administrators were always white men,
Yep.
right? And the teachers were always women.
Yeah, most of the time. That changed. You know when that changed? That changed during the Vietnamese War.
Okay.
I started teaching in 65. In around 68, in the beginning, men could get deferments for being from the draft for being in school. So they went on to graduate school. They went to accounting. They went to law schools. Around 68, deferment stopped for men in school, except I think medical school. And so all of a sudden, the exemption was if you were a teacher. So all of a sudden, all these guys who never wanted to be teachers in their lives,
right,
came to start teaching. They came with 1 or 2 years of graduate school behind them, and so they certainly felt they were resentful of being teachers. You know, they didn't see a choice, but they were resentful.
Right, because as far as they were concerned, that was beneath them.
It was beneath them, and their lives were interrupted. And then what happened was this lasted for like 4 or 5 years. Well, they met women and they got married.
Mm-hmm.
And then they got stuck. And a lot of these guys, that's how they remain teachers. Mm. Men of my generation, for the most part, I would say that 80% of them, maybe only 75, but I would say 80, or certainly of the ones I knew, became teachers only to stay out of the army, and were resentful of the fact that they did. And then a lot of them got stuck. Some of them left as soon as the war was over and they left and they resumed their whatever
careers.
But a lot of them were stuck because by that time, a lot of them had at least one child and a wife, and they had to support them. And so teaching became a much more co-ed career.
That's interesting. So let me ask you this, because you started teaching, and there are two things that are really significant and important about that. One is at some point you met your ex-husband, you got married, and then you started having children. So you then became a mom, and you were trying to balance career and family. And then the other thing, which of course is really important, is that you went on to work with children that were very different from you in terms of ethnicity and culture, and you spent most of your life teaching Black and brown children.
I don't know, to me,
I know you didn't think about it.
No, I don't, and I think children are children are children.
Right, but do you understand the significance of that? Do you understand that you could have made
a choice? Because I was raised to believe that. My mother's motto always was, I mean, I remember it really well. 2 things she used to say all the time. Flowers grow in dirt. Every time that I got angry that she let my kids go to the playground and roll around in the mud. And the other thing she always said to me was that God made flowers in all different colors. And she never, ever thought of that. That's why we could play outside.
That's true to you. I know that that's true to you because in all the years that I have known you, you have embraced our differences and you've treated us.
But I never saw them as differences. I saw you as kids. You were kids who had either the same amount or less than I had growing up. I knew that. I'm not stupid.
Right.
I
But you
was
also
aware of
gave,
that, but
you
you
gave
were
so
still
much.
the same kids. You were kids.
Mhm.
And I think that the fact that I was a mother who was working, okay? So my feeling always was that I am sending my children off to school, and I wanted them to be treated well. I mean, they're my children. I love them, and I wanted them to be treated well. And so it was my obligation to treat the kids in front of me as I would treat my own, hoping against hope that somebody else would feel the same way and
Right.
treat my kids that way.
Right.
So I think if I didn't have kids, I'm not sure I would have felt the same way,
Right.
or felt that it was an obligation.
Right.
But having kids and going to work made it very clear that that's what had to happen.
It's funny that
It
you
was,
say that. You reminded me of something my mother used to say to me all the time, related to exactly what you just said, which was, she always said, I believe in treating people, all people well. She said, because I hope and pray that when my children need something, they need help,
yeah,
that someone else will give them that help in the way that I help others. So, she
yeah.
felt, I guess it's karmic, right? So she kind of felt that same way. She would say that to us all the time, because she said, you guys, your life is going to go on. I'm not always going to be around, but I pray that all the things that I have done that are good will be repaid to my
To
children.
you, right, to you. I mean, that was very much
Mhm.
on my mind. Um, but again, I had always, my mother would say, my mother came from a very strange family. Um, there were 6 sisters, and they were almost in 2 warring camps of 3 and 3. And as they got older, my mother, I think, was a Jewish saint. I'm not sure, but um,
If such things exist, yes.
if such things existed, she, God knows, would be it.
Right.
But she had a twin sister, Belle, who she didn't speak to from the time I was born until I was about 16, because my Aunt Belle never had children. And my mother brought her to her house, me to her house one day. And my Aunt Belle was also a nurse. She was one of the 2 who got educated, and she married a doctor, big time. My father was not, I mean, he graduated 8th grade. So my mother brought me to her house when I was an infant, and she couldn't stand it. She couldn't stand the smell of the diapers. She couldn't stand the crying. She couldn't stand the fact that my mother was paying attention to me and not to her. And she told my mother not to bring me back until I was 12. And every once in a while, I would hear that story. They were twins.
Wow.
They were fraternal twins, but they were twins. And so when I was about 14 or 15, for some reason, my mother wanted to visit her. I think they always spoke every once in a while by phone, but not often. And I kept saying, why would I want to go and visit this lady? She didn't want to meet me. I didn't want to see her.
Right.
But my mother would always say to me, you can't stoop to somebody else's level. You cannot. I refuse to stoop to their level. I had an aunt. One of her sisters lived out in Arizona. The other one, who was a nurse who married a doctor, who also thought they were much better than my mother. She lived in Arizona, and they did not speak at all. The first time I think that they saw each other was when I was around 17, and my uncle, who lived in Connecticut, who we did speak to, their sister's husband died, and they all came together, and Belle and Min had to be coaxed out of the house to take a picture with my mother. They did not want to take a picture with her. But that was the first time I ever met her.
Mm.
And then years later, when Min was sick in California, the only one who would get on a plane to go out and see her was my mother. And they became very close in the end. But, and Belle, same thing. Belle was on the phone with my mother when she died. And my mom, I used to drive my mother out to Brooklyn to see Belle because she wanted to go. You know, or Belle had a heart attack and she was in the hospital. And I would drive her and I would say, I'm not going in. I have no desire to see these people. Belle, when my father died, was awful to me. Not to my mother, but to me, and yelled at me for spending money on my father's funeral, because after all, he wasn't a doctor. Why should he have a funeral that cost more money than her doctor husband? I am not as forgiving as my mother, never was. That's why I say she's a saint. But she always said that. I mean, that was her major thing. You don't stoop to somebody else's level. Right. Luckily, I have a little bit of my father in me, who did not suffer fools gladly, and had a bit more of a temper. Right. So I think I got that from him, because there's no way that I could forgive. I mean, I'm not forgiving of Trump supporters. Why? How could I ever be forgiving of somebody who,
in your own family, right?
Yeah, or who did children wrong. I mean, I can tell you about teachers at Manhattan Center who I had no use for, and that lasted because they didn't respect or care about kids. And I'm sorry, I guess that's stooping to, my mother would have said that's stooping to their level, but I just have no respect for it.
Well, it's about having integrity, right? And I mean, and I do understand what your mom was saying, because I was taught the same thing. As I turn the other cheek, be forgiving. I also had a hard time with that. And I do understand that. So we are at the end here, Elle. The last question.
Okay.
The last question. None. What advice would you give to a 20-year-old? You actually gave some really good advice, you know, and
well, it was my mother's advice, but I'm not sure I always took it.
Right.
Look, you know, you make it, you make it to the end.
But you're enjoying the fruits of your labor now, because
yes,
you have your sons, your grandsons.
That doesn't mean that everything is great.
No, but it never is. It's not great.
You know, I can look around me and say, oh crap, you know. Would I want my kids to be happier? Yeah. Would I want my grandsons to be happier? Sure. Would I wish that I maybe had done something differently? Yeah. You know, you make the best of what you've got, because you're not going to get anything else. Mm-hmm. You know, but that's it. I can't think of anything else, and I can't think of not doing what you need to do simply because you're a woman. It's mind-boggling to me that somebody would think that. Mm-hmm. You know, you are who you are, and damn it, make the best of it. So that's the only advice I have.
Well, I would say it's funny because, of course, the people who don't know you don't know all the ways that you've contributed to the well-being of so many children. So while you were just a mother of 2, you spent the bulk of your years teaching children.
Yeah, I did. And I used to, every once in a while, I felt guilty about that. But I don't anymore. I think that was a wonderful way to dedicate a life. You know, it was a wonderful way to dedicate a life. I mean, I get on Facebook. I have older friends in Riverdale who are appalled that I'm on Facebook, to be honest. I keep saying, yeah, but I can see all my old kids. I said, you know what that's like to see that they have children of their own who are going to college, and they're traveling the world, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful to see smiling faces on Facebook and know that that I had a part in that, or that I knew them, you know? I mean, I think that's, I think of so many of them. And I guess maybe one of the ones I think of most is Dwayne in Australia, who's got this wonderful life in Australia without masks. But it's wonderful to see that.
Well, but the whole thing is, it's important for you to know how grateful we are to you.
Yeah, I don't know that you need to be that grateful, but
No, I know I owe you a great debt.
you know, there were better English teachers. I was a good college advisor. I was that.
No better human being.
I was really a good college advisor. I'll give me that. But there were better English teachers. But I don't know that there were any who were more caring about it than I was.
Yeah.
You know, I really, that stayed with me the whole time. What are you crying for?
Because I love you so much. Because
But
you don't seem to understand that the life that I have today would not have been possible without you.
you know what I remember most?
That's what you did for somebody.
Remember how you wrote to me when you were in Ecuador that summer and I didn't get the letter for a year or two? I mean, I'll never forget that. So much for the mail system of Ecuador or the United States. For that matter.
Yes.
I mean, you were already in college. Did I ever give you that letter?
Yes.
Oh, good. Because I mean, I was hysterical. I kept looking at this letter saying, wait a minute, she's in school in upstate. Like, why am I getting this letter with airmail stamp?
Forever.
It was airmail.
Yes.
It was airmail. This was, and it was like 2 years. I'll never forget that.
Well, and that just goes to show how dedicated you were, even beyond high school. You know,
Well, just think of it. It's a good thing you called me from there and asked me to speak to Alfred, because otherwise, if you were waiting for me to respond, I wouldn't have responded for 3 years.
Exactly. But this is what I'm saying. So I know that, you know, so much time has passed. I'm speaking for so many other children who have so much to thank you for. Because
I hope so.
You really, you were an exceptional human being. You really have been.
Well, okay.
Don't see yourself that way, but we do.
All right. I will believe it, or I will accept it and say thank you. I think that's, yeah. I will accept it and say thank you.
Thank you, Ellen.
Okay.
I'm going to let you go. Thanks.
Okay. All right, get on with your next one.